call the meeting to order.
Lash,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Bott,
Yes.
Williams, Miller,
Yes.
The first item on the agenda is approval of minutes for our January 27th, 2014 work session. Move for approval of those minutes.
Second.
Lash,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Bott,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
And we have minutes from our January 27th, 2014 regular session. And I move for approval of those minutes.
Second.
Lash,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Bott,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
And under presentations this evening, we have Williams Keepers LLC 2013 Audit and Financial Report. Bruce?
Yes, Sharon, we have the presentation of the audit this evening, and I will start with Roger to give us a little background and the introductions.
Good evening, council. We have with us this evening Heidi Jacob Williams Keepers, LLC. She is a partner with Williams Keepers and lead partner as far as governmental audits. She is here this evening to give an overview and report of the 2013 fiscal year audit. Heidi?
Thanks, Roger. Thanks, I appreciate the opportunity to present the audit to you. I brought some handouts that way you have some color to look at, not just numbers. But I have given the pages as we go through the outline so that you can actually look at the financial statement too. We'll go through these first couple slides really quick. Just some background on me. Like Roger says, I am the audit partner on the engagement. I'm actually also Williams Keeper's partner that's in charge of our whole audit practice, and I also head up our government practice. So I wear several hats at WK. Kelly Schwartz was a manager on the job this year. Kelly Schultz, kind of hard to say Schultz, was the day-to-day in charge. They both are on our governmental team, so they have a lot of experience. Just some information on our government team. It's one of the niche areas that we specialize in. We spend a lot of time and effort keeping everybody up to speed, knowing what's going on. And so when we come and do your audit, we really do understand governmental accounting and understand municipalities. This year we actually only issued 2 reports, and I'll touch on a little bit why we only issued 2 instead of our normal 3. Under a normal audit, we follow what's called Generally Accepted Auditing Standards. We call that GAAS. So if you hear the reference GAAS, that's what it is. We issued an opinion on the financial statements, and then we issued a letter that we call Communication to Mayor and City Council. We normally issue a management letter, but one was not required this year because basically we didn't have anything we had to report to you. So that's actually a positive thing. We'll touch on that a little bit later in the presentation. A lot of times, too, you also see in prior years where I've referred to a couple other reports that are required under governmental auditing standards, and you have to follow those anytime you spend $500,000 or more in federal funds, and this past year you just didn't spend that much federal funds. So this is one year, kind of a fluke, that you just didn't have to follow those extra auditing standards. You actually issue a comprehensive annual financial report you see in front of you. It's pretty thick, a lot of information in there. And the reason it's thick is it goes above the minimum required financial reporting standards for a government. There's a standards board that sets all the rules that you have to follow when you're doing accounting and financial reporting, but you actually go above and beyond that. In the introductory section, when you look at this, and the statistical section, they're the parts that are extra that are not required, but you do that as part of your reporting process. You submit it to the Government Finance Officers Association. You actually get an award for that. It's an award for excellence in financial reporting. You got it for last year's report. It was the 24th consecutive year that you got it, so obviously something very prestigious. And what it does, it just gives anyone who's interested in the City of Mexico a lot of different information. The introductory section, it goes through like the organization chart, gives some information about the city. But the statistical section is really good, I think, because it gives trends. It will show you like the past 10 years of revenue, the past 10 years of expenses. So it's a really good place to go and kind of see where you've been and where you're going. But you did get that award, and this is what it looks like. I think actually now it's a plaque or something. It's a little bit different, but that's what it looks like. The basic financial statements, there's 7 components to it. It's a little bit different than a regular audit, and we'll touch on each one of these. But if you have questions as I go along, let me know. The independent auditor's report, that's obviously what we provide you. There's two sets of statements in a government. There's one that's called a government-wide, which is where everything is put together, shows all your assets and liabilities, and there's fund financial statements, which you're probably used to looking at on a monthly basis, where it separates out each individual fund. Within those fund statements, then there's two subsets under that. One's for the governmental funds, that's like your general fund, things like that, and the proprietary funds are your utilities. So there's a lot of different financial information in there, and I always think it's helpful if you don't look at these types of statements on a regular basis. It's easy to get confused with all those pages. I think it's good to go back and kind of get set in your mind what you're looking at, and this hopefully will help you do that. Then obviously the notes of the financial statement, those are an integral part of that. Our required supplementary information follows. We probably won't spend a lot of time on that. That includes budgetary comparisons, some information on the infrastructure, and then obviously pension information. There's some other information in there where it shows how we combined your various funds to get to those numbers out front. So, but if you get lost in this great big thick thing, if you go back to this or the table of contents, I think it'll help you kind of not get quite so confused. I know when I show this to my staff, they're like, oh my gosh, when they first got on it. One thing I would have you look at is the independent auditor's report. It's about maybe 20 pages in. It's the page that looks like this, if everyone can find that. It looks different this year. They did this thing called the Clarified Auditing Standards. In theory, it was supposed to clarify things. You guys didn't really see a big impact on that other than on the auditor's report. And the first thing you'll see is it's got titles in it now. So instead of just having 2 pages of paragraphs, they made it easier to try and identify where to find things. So it's really easy to look at the auditor's report now and know where management's responsibility is. And it's really easy to find the auditor's responsibility, the opinion, and different things like that. So that was one of the things that they did. The other thing they did was added some wording both in the management responsibilities section and particularly in the auditor section, where it talked about what we do relative to internal control, what your responsibilities are relative to internal control, and a little bit more wording about the audit process, because what they found is a lot of people don't really understand the audit process and the risk assessment process that we go through. Basically, we're required to do enough work to be able to give an opinion on whether or not your financial statements are fairly misstated. But you don't want us here the whole year, so we don't look at every transaction or anything like that. So what we do is we go through a risk assessment process to try and figure out if something was going to go wrong, where would it go wrong. We gain an understanding of your internal control. We talk to a variety of people to find out what their opinions are. So we do a bunch of different work to identify where the risk is, and that's where we focus our time. So that's what the audit is all about, risk assessment and then performing procedures. So there's some additional wording in here to clarify that. The opinion paragraph, they now call it unmodified rather than unqualified, but at the end of the day, it means you got a clean opinion. That's the best opinion that you can get. And again, that means that everything is fairly stated in all material respects in accordance with the accounting standards that are applicable to you. There's some other paragraphs in there that just talk about what we did to some of that supplementary information. But the main thing is to understand what the audit process is, your responsibilities, and then that you got a clean opinion. Any questions on the auditor's report? Okay. Management's discussion analysis on pages 3 to 14 in here. Roger writes this. This is his fun thing to do every year for us. It's intended to be a plain English story of what went on in the city during the year. It compares this year to last year. It's kind of a high-level overview, but it gives some really good information. Some of the financial highlights that Roger noted were that Phase 2, the wastewater plant project, was capitalized during the year. There's really a significant decrease in grant activity, and we saw that because you didn't have as much federal funds. And then there was the 1/2 cent sales tax for Parks and Rec that started during the year. Other than that, it just goes through and gives some general information, general comments on a variety of different things. So, and I always tell people, if you don't want to read the whole thing, that's one place you would go, because it does do a good job, and you know, like I said, plain English of telling the story of what went on. The entity-wide statements, they are on page 15 and 16. And what this does, it puts everything in the city together in one place. And all your assets are recorded and all your liabilities are recorded. So that means all the land that you own, all the buildings that you own, all the streets that you own, all that type of stuff, it shows up as an asset. And all your liabilities are recorded. So if you have debt, it's recorded there. Any long-term liabilities, they're recorded there. So this is the one place where you're most like the rest of the world in your financial reporting. But even here, it's broken out between government activities and business type activities. If you just remember, your business type activities are essentially your utilities, and everything else is governmental activities. That's what you raise your taxes for, to provide streets, to provide parks and rec, to provide public safety. That's all in the governmental activity column. The statement of net assets shows your assets and your liabilities. That's on page 15. It does show your investment in the Missouri Plant Center. I've got a couple comments on some of the changes from the prior year. The statement of activities, which is on page 16, is basically your income statement, shows your revenue, your expenditures, and comes down to your net change in net assets, or basically your net income for the year. As we said previously, there was a significant decrease in capital grants because there were several that were completed last year, and there was just nothing similar in the current year. There was an increase in wastewater fees that you saw in there, and there was a decrease in the landfill estimated post-closure costs. DNR actually came in and kind of reassessed what the liability was, and you were able to drop that liability down, so that flowed through the income statement. But again, it shows all your assets, all your liabilities. It's the place you're most like other entities, so it's a really good picture of where you're at. Did anyone have any questions? And you can kind of see, one thing I won't see any other place but in this handout, I went back and did like the 4 prior years, so you can kind of see what your assets were across those 4 years, the liabilities, your revenues, your expenditures, and then the net increase. Just some historical information if you're interested. The governmental funds. Now we're into the fund statements, and this is where you're looking at funds on an individual basis. And this is probably how you're used to seeing them. The governmental funds, again, is like the governmental activities. This is your public safety, your general fund, the things that a government does that really nobody else does. There's 4 statements, but I think we're probably only going to really look at 2, and I've got the page numbers up there. The one thing I would point out is your governmental fund statements are on what's called a modified accrual basis. What that means is, for the most part, it's not significantly different than an accrual basis. If somebody owes you money, you record the receivable and the revenue. If you owe somebody money, you record that expense and the liability. In the governmental fund statements, however, you don't see long-term debt, and you don't see long-term capital assets. So you don't see streets or buildings recorded in there. And the other thing is there's a certain time frame that you would have to collect your receivables to show as revenue. So if you look at property taxes, we go through and estimate how much property taxes are owed you at the end of your year. And we book that as a receivable and property tax revenue, unless you don't collect them within 60 days. So it's just a little bit of quirkiness in how you record the governmental funds. If you look in the footnotes, there's probably a better description of how that process works. But there's just a little bit of difference in how things are recognized in these fund statements versus those entity-wide ones you looked at a little bit ago. The statement of assets, liabilities, and fund balances, again, that's basically your balance sheet for your governmental funds, shows the assets and liabilities. There's really no significant change in that from the prior year. Page 18 then reconciles your governmental fund balance sheet up to your entity-wide balance sheet. And this is where the governmental accounting gets a little confusing, so I probably won't spend a lot of time on that. But if you go back and look at it and you have some questions, just let me know. Okay. So 18 reconciles page 17 back up front. The statement of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balance on page 19, that is your income statement for your governmental funds. And it'll show all the revenue that came in, the expenditures by fund and by various categories. That's the net change. And that does reflect the decrease in the intergovernmental revenue due to the decrease in grants, and then also the decrease in the capital outlay for grants compared to prior year. And then page 20 is just another reconciliation to go from those fund statements up to the front. So if you really wanted to focus on them, I would focus on page 17 and page 19, the balance sheet and income statement. So those were the governmental fund statements, governmental fund statements, which again is the governmental activities that only a city does. Your enterprise fund statements are your utilities, and they again have the same thing. They have a balance sheet, a statement of net assets, which is on page 21. They've got a statement of revenue, expenses, and changes in fund net assets on page 2. So basically another balance sheet, another income statement, but these are for your utility funds. And I've got some comments up there on some of the changes this year compared to last year. They also have a statement of cash flows, and all this does is takes that income statement and converts it to cash basis, and it kind of tells you where your cash came in, where your cash went out, and it puts it in certain buckets. So operating activities is the cash you just generated through your normal operating activities, just running the utilities. Financing activities is where you've gone out and gotten debt or something like that. It's how you financed overall activities. Overall, you had a decrease in cash balances compared to last year. So again, you've got your entity-wide that puts everything all together. You've got your governmental fund statements, that's your governmental activities, and then you've got your enterprise statements. But they all have a balance sheet of some sort, they all have an income statement of some sort, and then the governmental funds have those reconciliations. The footnotes are on page 24 to 44. A lot of people don't look at them because there's a lot of them and there's several pages of them, but they really are key to understanding the numbers that we just looked at on those statements. Footnote 1 goes through and explains all the accounting policy. So it would explain how the funds show up. It would explain that modified accrual basis so you can go back and get a better understanding of how things are recorded. So note 1 really just explains how things end up in the statement. The footnotes really are pretty consistent with last year. No new footnotes. Obviously, the numbers changed, but really nothing new. Some of the key notes that you might want to look at, I've noted up there, are capital assets. You've got a lot of money invested in capital assets. That's all, again, all your buildings, your streets, your equipment. Note 7 and 8 have to do with your debt. And then note 11 are your commitments and contingencies. So those are ones that we think are particularly important, even though all of them are really helpful to understanding up front. Numbers don't tell the whole story. That's why you need the notes to kind of explain things. Any questions so far? I know we're going through that pretty quickly, but any questions on anything we've covered so far?
Heidi, we might mention on our reduction in cash and enterprise funds, that is due to the spending of bond proceeds for capital improvements.
Okay. Anything else I didn't cover? So that's all I was going to cover in the financial statements, unless you have any questions.
I have one.
Okay.
This book here, the little book that you sent out earlier on page 3, said we identified a potential adjustment which was not required and is not reflected in the audit financial statements. And this entry was to increase sanitary funds accumulated depreciation and reduce depreciation expense by $13,790. And this depreciation expense that was recorded prior to 2005 and again recorded in 2013. Is there a particular piece of equipment that's tied to, or what happened there?
No, and that's actually the next report we're going to go over. A couple years, I think it was 2005, you converted your depreciation system and went back. There's some accounting standards that changed, then you went back and converted your depreciation system. And as part of that process, you reassess some of the lives of the equipment. Under accounting standards, you can't go back and change an estimate you've done in the past. You change it going forward. But the people that redid your depreciation schedule went back and redid it from day one. So if you had a piece of equipment you said was going to be 7 years, and so in 2005 you said, well, no, it's really going to last 10 years. What you have to do under accounting standards is just take that going forward, not change what you've done. But what they did in their software, they went back to the original purchase and depreciated it if it was going to be 10 years the whole time. So it's just kind of a technicality in the way they did the depreciation that year. This year, it got cleared out, and it shouldn't have. There should have been a difference that went on a little bit longer, and I think it was just Roger and I think Vicki were just trying to tie to the depreciation schedule and then adjusted that out. When I talk about past journal entries, a lot of times the example I use is when you balance your checking account. And I probably said this last year. You know, when you balance it, do you balance it to the penny, the nearest dime, the nearest dollar, the nearest $10? That's what this is. We don't think it causes anything to be materially misstated. It's just a quirk that you guys have from something that happened back in 2005 that the city went ahead and cleared out and really shouldn't have. But $13,000 really isn't that material.
It does impact rates, though, at some point, does it not?
No, it's a non-cash.
It's a non-cash transaction because it's
You collect
depreciation.
depreciation expense as part of rates, because at some point you got to replace that property.
Yeah, well, this was in the sanitation fund, and it was the building that's located out at the landfill, which you know is landfill post-closure. And just as a quick example, like at the time that we built it, we might have given like 30 years depreciation. And when Maximus came in 2004 to get us GASB 34 compliant, they gave it like 50-year
Oh, okay.
depreciation schedule. So it's that gap that we're trying to close.
Yeah.
Okay, so it does not impact rates then?
Right, it doesn't-
I don't think so.
Thank you.
If you turn to that report, that is the next report I was going to go over. This is a required communication on the audit process, so you kind of get a feel for how things went. It's kind of boilerplate, so it's going to be really similar to last year. So I'm just going to kind of hit the highlights of it. We did change or update for those clarified auditing standards. The biggest thing you saw was the change in the report. There's a couple things, and actually doing the audit we had a change, but really no big impact other than that. There's some information in there about planning and the scope of the audit. Really, the things that I was going to touch on were the significant audit findings. There's really no change in your accounting policies during the year, so everything was consistent with prior year. There's a couple new accounting standards that we implemented, but really all it did was change some wording, so it didn't really change the way any of the numbers are recorded. So you probably didn't really even notice those changes. They're pretty small. It does talk about significant estimates. Anytime you do a financial report as at a specific point in time, some things you know, like the cash in the bank, you know, but some things you estimate. Just like we talked about, how long are your fixed assets going to last? Are they going to be 20 years or 30 years? That's an estimate. The post-closure costs, that's an estimate of what it's going to take to close those off. Fair value of contributions, some of the post-retirement obligations. So some stuff you just have to estimate using the best knowledge you can. And so it talks about those estimates in there and what we looked at to make sure they were reasonable. Because they do have an impact on your financial statements. The disclosures, we look at those obviously. We consider them to be neutral, clear, and consistent as much as they can be for a governmental entity. We've already talked about the key disclosures, but we go through and look at those. The biggest thing is really we have no difficulty doing the audit. Roger and Vicki and all their staff are very cooperative. In fact, anyone we talk to is very cooperative. They take the time to answer our questions, give us information. Roger and Vicki every year give us a little bit better and more information, so it's really a pretty smooth process, and so I think it works really well. We did talk about that one adjustment. It just came up when we were looking at depreciation, and they adjusted it to 0. Should have stayed 13,000, but again, we didn't consider it to be anything significant. We're just required to report it to you, so that's why it's in there. And no disagreements with management regarding any financial reporting issues whatsoever. So any other questions on that report? And so what we talked about on that past entry, does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. The management letter, you're probably used to seeing a management letter. I talked about earlier, when you go through a risk assessment process, we obviously have to understand how stuff gets recorded, who does what, who signs the checks, that type of stuff. We don't do enough work to actually give an opinion on internal control, but we notice stuff as we do our work. And so if we notice stuff, we evaluate how big a deal is it. And I've got some definitions in there. So if there's either a break in your system, a break in the design, or a break in how you operate it, you know, the design's okay, but you didn't do what you're supposed to do. We call that control deficiency. And then we decide, is it a material weakness? If it's a material weakness, that deficiency means that something could happen, and if it did happen, it could have a material impact on your financial statements. That's the most serious thing, because that means something could be wrong in your financial statements that could cause them to be materially misleading. And we had none of those. And in fact, we didn't really identify anything that had to be was required to be reported to you in writing. So that's really a good thing. I think Roger and Vicki and Bruce and everybody have done a really good job segregating duties, identifying issues, and making sure that there's policies and procedures in place so that you can rely on your financial reporting on a regular basis. So we didn't issue a formal letter, but I did want to let you know why we didn't, and the fact that that's really a good thing that we didn't have to this year. And again, we really appreciate the opportunity to do the audit. We really appreciate everyone taking the time to not only get ready for the audit, but to answer our questions. You know, when we call or visit people, everyone's very, very cooperative. And overall, I think the audit goes really well. And we don't have any issues really that we came up with. Any questions on the audit process or how anything works? I know these are pretty thick, and you may not have had a chance to go through them, but if you do go through them and you have any questions, either just let Roger know, or I'm easy to contact. You can email me or call me, and I'll be glad to answer any questions you might have. I know there's a lot of information in there.
Any questions? No? Well, thank you very much. Appreciate you coming and giving us an oral report on the audit. Thank you. Okay. Continuing on the agenda, under resolutions this evening, we have Bill Number 2014-08, a resolution accepting and authorizing the city manager to sign an extension of on-call engineering services with Schaefer Klein Warren. This is up for reading and passage. Bruce?
Yes, Your Honor, as it says that we have the on-call engineering agreement, and as a part of that, the current agreement allows us for an extension. And to cover the details of that option and what we're doing, I will turn to Kenzie Russell.
Council may recall that last year we went through a selection process interviewing engineering firms to serve as our on-call engineer, supplemental engineering for various projects in the city, and selected Schaefer Klein & Warren for that. We entered into a contract with them that provided for an extension, actually provides for up to 3 extensions, but on a year-to-year basis. And both parties, Schaefer Klein & Warren and the city, have to be satisfied with the services provided and agree to the extension, as well as have a sit-down review meeting. And this year, Chad and I, Bruce, and 2 representatives from Schaefer Klein & Warren were involved in that review meeting. Chad, because the Park Department has used some of their services this year, myself through Public Works and Engineering. We actually had 4 task orders this past year that they performed work for us on. The general contract does not have a cost to the city. There's no retainer, and so this extension does not have a cost associated with it. As issues come up that we need assistance on, we contact Schaefer Klein & Warren and ask for their assistance and a scope, a definition of what those services will be, and a cost is negotiated out on a project-by-project basis, and those are approved as task orders throughout the year. So the approval of an extension of services tonight does not carry any cost associated with it. After our review, both parties were satisfied with the past year and past year's performance, and so we're recommending that we do exercise the option to extend the contract for an additional 1-year time frame. Next year, we'll go through the same process, and assuming both parties are agreeable, may come back for a second extension. But this extension is just for a 1-year time frame.
Questions? I have one. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Did you have one?
No, I was to move from reading. so go
Okay.
ahead.
I have one question. The hourly rate schedule, is that the same as last year, or has that been increased by some automatic factor?
No, it is the same.
It is the same.
The only change was they redefined a couple of the titles there. I think their planner may be redefined in that, but the rates are exactly the same as they were last year.
That's a good deal.
Yes.
Okay.
I move for reading of Bill Number 2014-08.
Second.
Lesh,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Bott,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Bill Number 2014-08, a resolution accepting and authorizing the city manager to sign an extension of on-call engineering contract services with Schaefer Klein & Warren Incorporated. Whereas the City of Mexico entered into an on-call engineering contract with Schaefer Klein & Warren SKW in January of 2013, and whereas according to the terms of the contract, an optional renewal for an additional year could be entered into with the agreement of both parties, and after a review meeting was held. Now therefore be it resolved by the Council of the City of Mexico, Missouri as follows. Section 1, the city manager is hereby authorized to sign an extension on-call engineering contract with Schaefer, Klein, and Warren Incorporated for a one-year period. Section 2, this resolution shall be in full force and effect from and after the time of its passage. I move for passage of Bill number 2014-08.
Lash,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Bott,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Under other business this evening, we have a staff report, purchase of pickup truck for the wastewater department. Bruce?
Yes, Your Honor. To cover the bids received, I will turn to Kenzie Russell.
The wastewater department is replacing, this is not an additional pickup, but it is a replacement pickup. They took bids for a new 4x2 standard half-ton pickup with a Tommy lift on it, and received actually 5 bids from 4 different vendors. You can see them there in your letter. Pearl Motor Company, with the local preference from our purchasing policy, is the lowest and best bid that meets the specifications that we set out for our 2014 Chevrolet Silverado pickup truck. Funds for this are coming from funds that were saved in the purchase of the biosolids truck, which, by the way, is in Springfield and is befitted with the tank, and we expect delivery in March on that truck. But those bids came in substantially under what we had budgeted, and we had previously requested the pickup truck, but had taken it out of the budget due to expected funding, and so we're asking that we use some of the savings from the biosolids for the purchase of the pickup truck here tonight. And so we're recommending or asking for approval to make this purchase from Pearl Motor Company.
It says replacing a truck,
Yes, sir.
and the other one is going where?
It's being traded in.
Okay.
The pricing, the bid amounts here do reflect the trade-in.
Yes, they
value.
usually have trade-in on it, okay, include trade, okay, I see it now, all right.
I believe the trade-in amount was in the neighborhood of $1,500,
On Pearls, 1750.
$1,750. Yeah.
Council, if you would total, so that you know the total prices, the liquid biosolids truck was $136,477 total purchase. This is, of course, if you do this purchase this evening, is $21,090, and so that comes up to a total of the $157,567, and we did budget for the total purchase of $164,450, so we're still under budget.
You had specified that you wanted heated mirrors.
No, sir.
You didn't specify that?
We did get a quote that included that, but we did not specify it in our initial specification, I don't believe. We didn't intend to.
Okay.
We're not purchasing the truck with it.
Well, I noticed that it says if you go with the standard towing packages, standard towing mirrors, it's $777. That accounts for the difference between what was written and what actually the bid was.
Right.
Okay. And yeah, we did specify heated mirrors. Is that something that we should
do.
have that?
With the street department, we specify heated mirrors because when we're plowing snow,
Sure.
that they ice up and all, if we don't have that, but it's not necessary for wastewater.
Okay.
You don't have the same circumstances.
Your Honor, I'd move to purchase the 2014 Chevrolet truck from Pearls as indicated in the bids.
Second.
Lunt,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Bott,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
The next item under other business is discussion of brush and compost operation. Bruce?
Yes, Your Honor. I think the best place to start this evening, this discussion, is really what is currently happening, and so that you have at least the basis of where we're currently at. So as we look at our current composting brush yard operation, currently the cost of that operation is located with what we call within Fund 12, which is the Sanitation Department. We do have a contract for operation with Brake Brothers from Columbia, Missouri. As a part of that contract, the rate for that contract is $30,000 in order to operate the site for us. There are also some additional miscellaneous costs that we have associated with that for that contract and some things that are provided under it, and that's for another $3,500. So in essence, the cost to operate is currently running right at $33,500 a year. The annual cost to each residential sanitation customer, and currently we use the average number of customers of 4,308, so that you have basically a cost per customer running about $7.80 a year for this, or $65 a month, to give you an idea. No, 65 cents a month, I'm sorry. $65 a month, a little high priced, isn't it? Hours of operation currently in the wintertime, which is classified as December 1st through February 28th, is they only operate on Saturdays from 9 to 2. During the summer months, which is classified as March 1 through November 30, they currently operate the site Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday from 10 to 7, and Saturdays 9 to 2. Okay, so that's really what you're getting right now for that $33,000, $33,500. Now, as a part of that, we had to, it was time to rebid the contract and to look at, the future as far as costs of that. And I think it is safe to say at this point, based on what we got back, and I'll disclose that here just shortly, but the issue is you will not get the same service at the price that you're paying now. That's very clear. We did rebid that. Brake Brothers chose not to bid. We did receive one bid, which what I'd call a full-scale run operation at that site under the similar conditions that we currently have, and generally that cost was running right at $130,000. So as you can see, I do not believe that you're probably prepared to make that kind of a rate adjustment to make that happen. So as we look at this, I think we do have some options that we need to look at. And I'll kind of detail those options here slightly, but I think we'll really get down to the root of the situation by the time I get done with those options. And I've asked Roger and Kenzie, and of course Chad's been sitting in on this because they use the site as well, to make any comments that they have as well. But as you look at it, I think an option that you have before you is, shut the site down and use it for internal use only, that we don't offer the service. There would be a reduction in cost at that rate. I think if you did that, that does run some issues, though, as far as what do people do with some of it? Does it add to illegal dumping? Does it add to more burning? All those issues. It does, so that maybe not be the total issue, but I think that's always an option. I think another option is what I've called option 2, is certainly a city-run type site, and that can be anywhere from what I call more of a full-scale type of thing to a reduced scale. We were estimating, if we were looking at maybe running more of what we call a full-scale type operation, which is along the similar lines that we currently do, you're probably looking at a city-run site somewhere in the neighborhood of $80,000 a year. So obviously you would want to probably maybe look at some reduce of that. The contract run site, obviously we have a cost on that of roughly $130,000. If you looked at some kind of reduced scale on that, we do not have a price on that. That's something we'd have to rebid if we chose to do that. And then, of course, we could look at some kind of a combined situation. And I think the question really comes there, what do I mean by a combined situation is at the site we currently do what I'm calling brush operations and compost. Do we continue to offer both of those, or do we break that contract out in some way? So all of those things are on play. Now, where do I think this really goes to, though, is that I think what we're asking this evening from direction from you guys, council, is to say, I think it really comes down to cost. What are you willing to fund? What level are you willing to fund this service at? Because it goes back to the rates. And if you're only willing to really fund it at its current level, then we got to take a look at a different operation. If you want to fund it up, to providing everything it's currently providing, then we got to talk about how we're going to pay for it. So, as anything, it all comes back to money. How much money do you want to spend for this service? And then we can maybe try to help you decide, give you some options at that point to say, how could we run it then? So, at this point, I'll turn to Roger to anything I may have missed that you would like to add to the discussion at this time. And
Well, just to break it down mathematically, you can pretty much figure for every $5,000 you add to our current $33,500, you'll add about a dime a month to each customer, or about a ton per year. So if you add $20,000 to the cost, then you're going to add 40 cents a month to each resident. That's kind of fine where our balance is going.
Do you have any insight as to why Brick Brothers did not send a bid?
I think the best one to answer that maybe is Kinsey.
I mean, since they're already set up in here, I'm kind of interested in why they did.
Yes, I think it boils down to the fact that they've been losing money. They had enough integrity to continue their contract to the end with us, but due to a variety of factors, ice storms, tornadoes, and such, there's been a glut on the market of this kind of material. They are set up primarily to grind and reduce material. Marketing was not necessarily one of their strong points, and then when you add the glut that made the marketing that much more difficult, they just were not making money at it. And so I think if the dollar amount changes, they might come back into play. St. Louis Composting is the one entity we did get a bid from. They run 5 sites in the St. Louis area, including for the city of St. Louis. So they're perhaps better acquainted with the regional market for material in that regard. But I think Brick Brothers did not rebid simply because they were running ready.
In my opinion, around $130,000 is too much to spend, so
Oh,
I would discount the St. Louis bid. My other question would be, and I'm sure Roger can speak to this also, Bruce, we ran this for years for free. In essence, for free. We didn't charge at the gate or anything else. We ran through the maintenance building yard, or the yard by the maintenance building to the back. And people really liked that. I didn't hear one complaint about it, and I've heard 50 about the situation as it is now. But my concern is why, when we did that as a service for so many years, does it now cost us $80,000 to do it again?
Well, I'll answer part of that, and they can add to it as well. At the time that you were running that, we had 2 more street department employees that we no longer have.
Okay.
Okay, so we've reduced personnel by not running that. As a part of that, you still had a cost of grinding, and so you're still going to have that
Right.
issue. The other thing is that you, by doing that kind of a thing, you did end up with illegal dumping. You ended up with products that wasn't supposed to be there. And you also, and when you were going through the street department, you also ended up with things that disappeared that shouldn't have. So, you had people bringing stuff that shouldn't have and taking stuff that they shouldn't have. So it caused more problems for us maybe than it did for the resident issue. That would be a thing that we really wouldn't like to see come back for those reasons. But you're going to have a cost because we were able to reduce personnel, and you're still gonna have those issues with grinding and taking care of that site. I think before you didn't necessarily run those costs through sanitation, or I'm not sure where you run them. So that's where I'll turn to Roger at to answer that.
Yeah, in basically about 2000, you had the formation of the Central Missouri Solid Waste District. It was probably formed before that. But they got into the concern of handling brush. So there was a grant that was made amongst that pact of cities to buy a large tub grinder. So initially, we really didn't have any cost other than our own street personnel managing the debris that was there. I think our first year that we charged this to the sanitation fund, our cost was about $3,750. And from that point on, we ran anywhere from $9,000 to $17,000 in cost running through the sanitation fund. And that was basically strictly for the cost of grinding, really having personnel costs associated with that. Now, as far as it going to the sanitation fund, some of that was triggered from the point to take a little bit of relief off of the general fund, because the general fund's cash flow wasn't as strong as it could have been because of its support to other funds, which, as we all know, just recently we resolved one of those issues as far as the support to the Parks Fund through the half-cent sales tax. As far as actually charging physical dollars to the sanitation fund, that started in the year 2000.
It's my recollection, you certainly are welcome to correct me if I'm wrong, 'cause I probably am. But it seems like when we first talked about Brake Brothers, the annual cost that the city was estimating was about $26,000. Does that sound approximately right?
Probably the first year was probably closer to $17,000 to $20,000. I think the first year of the contract.
No, I'm talking about prior to the contract, what
Okay.
we estimated our cost was,
Correct.
that it would be about $26,000. Yeah, I think that included time and of the individuals plus the grinding and was it?
That's what-
Would that be correct?
Part-time person plus the
Right.
grinding, I believe.
Yeah.
Right, we were not including the cost of the hours before the part-time person showed up in the late evenings.
Right.
We were not including the cost of the full-time people that were out there moving the brush.
And now we have two less.
Yeah.
Right, that is correct.
So would it, in order to be able to do this, we'd have to hire two more people? Is that?
If you go back to a full-time operation. If you want to go back to basically a much smaller part-time, I think we can get, that cost down. If you're talking the 80,000, you're talking a full-time person that does that 40 hours a week and equipment and operation and so on.
Bruce, if I could chime in too on when I first started doing this, we had pretty strict rules as to what size you could drop off. And at some point in time, when we started going out and contracting with the larger grinding companies, I think it was Hanson's out of St. Louis, they were willing to grind bigger material and started allowing bigger material to come on the lot, because we had a person over there then, that if you remember, Kerry would sign people up for a firewood permit, and they'd come out there and cut firewood.
Sure.
Well, when we went to this new deal and Kerry moved up here around that time period, that firewood permit went away, and so a lot of that big diameter material that used to just go away on its own is no longer leaving the site on its own. And so there is a difference in volume that occurs in what kind of equipment you have to process it.
Well, it occurs to me, and obviously, we haven't done an exhaustive study about what to do, but it occurs to me that we, A, should not take this service away from the public, because I don't have a good feeling about where it'll go if it doesn't. And B, if it's cost effective to do it, I don't see that we have much choice but to look at some modification to the city running the operation again. And I know that Kenzie's cringing when we say that, and I know that you have concerns regarding workman's comp and so forth about the cars going through the lot. I think we'd have to probably look at marking some way for folks to get back there in a certain.
Greg, I don't think, if we took it on, I don't think we would move public traffic through the lot.
Okay.
We'd
Go from
have
the
to
back.
We'd still leave it from the
Continue
back.
to go through the back. If we needed to add some gravel or whatever back there to do that, but I don't think we could really afford to move the public back into the maintenance lot
Okay.
in that
Our
regard.
tool shrinkage improved markedly when we got these wireless gates. Seriously.
The other thing that we would need to look at is, of course, we could certainly have someone out there, whatever schedule that we might need to meet the public's needs, whether it be limited or full scale, as far as receiving the brush. The next step would be, once we receive it, are we gonna hire someone to come in and grind it, or are we gonna have an employee actually grind it, which you, again, would have to buy the grinding tub. And I would certainly let you know that when I check work comp rates and someone running a grinder, it's 2.5 times what it would be for a street worker or wastewater employee, because it's considered a fairly high-risk job. So then we have to decide to absorb that
That's
liability and
understandable.
push it on.
Yeah, that's understandable. But I really reiterate, I hate to take the service away from the public, because I think it's gotten to be something that they count on, and I would not be in favor of doing that.
What is the city of Fulton, Moberly, Boonville, what are they doing in regard to this kind of activity?
Roger, why don't you go ahead, yeah.
Moberly does the operation themselves. It's run through the Public Works Department. They're somewhat like what we used to be. Is basically when their gates open, people are just driving in and dumping it, and there's not really any monitoring of it that I could find in my phone call to them. As far as Fulton, they accept brush also, and I didn't get the details as far as their hours, but then they hire someone to come in and grind it on a periodic basis.
You don't know what Boonville does or
No,
the other?
That's basically what we used to do, right? Then we hired somebody to come in and bring the grinder in, they ground it up, and we just basically oversaw the site.
Right, we would have a dollar amount set each year for grinding, and the people that came in would say, once you reach this dollar amount, turn your machine off. And we'd go from there.
Sure, I understand that too.
No, once it's ground, yes, you still have to get rid of it.
Have to do something with it, right?
Does Foster grind any of their own over there at Avaz?
Chad, you did some checking on that for us. Why don't you talk about what Foster's,
Well, we can haul material 4 feet and less all the way down to Chip to Foster's, and they'll pay us $5.85 a ton delivered to that yard. That'll just about wash the cost of taking a truck open and back and the personnel to do it. So basically, if you get it down to a certain size, there is a market for it. Currently, that market would just about break even with hauling material. I mean, we used to use as much of that material as we could, but, the pile of excess material we have right now, there'd be a need to move some of it outside. And if you have a big ice storm or something, Park probably won't be able to utilize all the material either. I mean, we could find creative ways to get it out in landscaping using it. We used to do that. We moved as much as we could every year, but we still ended up with surplus. I think one year we sold, when you know we sold it to Kingsford? Roger was. I mean, we got the pile, we sold a whole bunch to Kingsford and charcoal one time. I mean, there are options at times, but like Kenzie said, right now, there's a huge glut. Right now still from, John Blood and ice storms in Springfield, still quite a bit of material in the system.
When we ran the operations ourselves, and Kenzie, please correct me if I've got this misstated, we would bring in an average of about 7,000 cubic yards of brush. Brake Brothers, in a conversation with them, said that has grown to about 12,000 cubic yards of brush.
So there is an increase in demand for the service.
a lot more commercial use?
More commercial.
And the cost per unit has definitely increased. One of those things is like Roger was talking about, you're talking to these guys who contract this stuff, the workers' comp cost and insurance cost has increased, as has the machinery cost.
So can we go back to cutting wood on this out there also?
We could, we could set up an arrangement similar to what they did before. They get a permit here in City Hall, cut firewood out of the designated pile or location.
you need the solar permit so you buy that liability,
Yeah.
that right to infringe on their freedom to cut. If you give them a payment, basically you tell them what the risks are, you can basically purchase that right to sue you.
That leaves some way we're gonna be able to figure this out.
So I think, as I said, when we started this thing, all said, it's back down to how much money are you willing to spend for the service? And then we can come back to you and say what type of program we think we can give you for that.
I'm like Greg, I definitely wanna keep it going, so.
We're spending, what was our contract, 30?
33.
$30,000 to Great Brothers, and there's like $3,500 in there for cost of like furnishing the porta pots and other miscellaneous items.
So if we're gonna use that as a baseline, it would be another 80,000 on top of that?
No, no,
Okay.
no, that would be a total issue, yeah. That's if we tried to run it
Like
similar to
like
what
the-
we've got now. So,
You know,
but I think it's gonna have to come down to, if you're gonna try to keep it within the same cost, it just means we gotta reduce the number of hours and, because you just can't
Well,
afford to
that-
put a full-time person out there.
I think that's reasonable.
And then it becomes a situation that, you know, we still enter through that side gate, but it's not operated 42 hours or whatever it is a week, it's maybe down to 10.
Or 12 or 15, whatever.
I know.
I think we've got to keep it.
And then you still got the cost of getting rid of, grinding and getting rid of it. So costs aren't gonna go away by reducing hours, it's,
I would say we stay within, $35,000 range, somewhere in there. See what you can work up.
Works for me.
and I know this is really more of an item for a work session, but because we're meeting tonight and this came about, we thought it was least important to have a discussion.
Does that contract expire?
The contract expires in April,
Yes.
April.
The end of April.
so we wanted to make sure we dealt with it now, because part of it's setting the rates for the year too, because we normally do that in March.
Now, when you talk to Brake Brothers okay, you indicated that Brake Brothers might be interested if there was more money in it. Was there a cap set, or was it just bid out? I don't, and
Kind of open-ended.
what I don't understand is, I mean, they know the layout. Why didn't they bid it so that they could make some money at it, rather than just walk away?
I'll give you an opinion on it. As they were here during the last renewal, and when that contract price went up, we had, concerns about that. And I really think when they looked at it, instead of, I'm gonna have to charge to do what we're doing, it's gonna have to increase significantly, and I don't see you doing it, so it's a waste of my time to bid. I'm just making that assumption.
Yep.
We went from 17 to 30, right? Isn't that what we did in the 2 years? But they were good enough to come over and stay with us after the contract expired. We really have a contract for about 2 or 3 months. Am I correct in that also?
Well, it was during the renewal time.
Yeah.
But now, there were years before that 17 that we spent more than 30, because there were a couple times where the pile got really big. We had to hire Hanson's in, and we overran the budget about 5 years ago.
You know, I pulled all the history on it today, and I think about the highest year might have been close to 18,000.
For just grinding.
Just grinding.
Just grinding, that was only grinding.
Would Brake Brothers be interested in doing the reduced hours?
That's something we would wanna discuss with them. We'd give them that. We haven't discussed that, because right now, well, and, go ahead.
Yeah, once we kind of had some parameters to work with, we could ask for proposals from St. Louis Composting, Great Brothers, and whoever else, and see what kind of plan or proposal they might give us. What we bid out essentially was a contract similar to what we have been doing with those hours and all in it. So, since that came in substantially higher, say the other approach would be to take the budget and then ask them for a proposal, see what kind of services they could provide to us for that amount of money, and see whether we like it or think we can do better on our own or whatever. So I wouldn't say that Brake Brothers or St. Louis Composting necessarily would be out picture at this point. We just decided we needed to get the framework established differently, since we knew what we were doing wasn't going to be workable for the same dollar.
If we're going to change the scope, then we'll rebid it, give them a different scope.
That was my question.
That's the
Yeah.
point.
If we'd have to rebid it, and I think we would.
Oh, yes, yeah, we'd change the scope and then give them a better idea of what we're asking for and see what the price would be. So it's about of changing the scope of what we're going to ask them for.
Do you have what you need, or do you?
I think we do. I think this gives us some direction now to say, hey, you got to stay within the dollars, and we'll go back out and try to come back with how we can make it work for you. And then we'll, if we can, we'll see how the timing works. Maybe we'll try to have it back in 2 weeks as a discussion item for work session or something.
Okay.
But we'll just have to see how the timing works.
I know I asked 2 years ago, but what's the grinder cost?
The grinding,
Grinder.
oh,
From about
Yep.
320 to 750, 800, depending on how you outfit it and how many horsepower you have.
And the grinder that Brake Brothers used is $150,000.
We don't have
It
one
was
of
like a
those.
7,000, I think. Yeah,
Thousand.
yeah, 750,000.
But it can be depreciated out, Roger.
Yeah, over 200 years.
And we can't print money, correct, Roger?
Yeah.
Okay, next, under other business, we have the claims.
Move we pay the claims?
Second?
Lesh,
Yes.
Nichols,
Yes.
Bott,
Yes.
Miller,
Yes.
Next, we have council comments. Councilman Bott.
I really don't have anything except, Kenzie, I hearkened back to your work session last meeting and all good information, and when it started snowing again, I was thinking, there's Kenzie on his computer and checking the temperature and checking the wind and trying to figure out what to do and how to do it, and it was very interesting and informative. I really didn't think you could make an hour out of that, but you did.
Councilman Nichols.
I know the guys did a good job on moving the snow. You know, a lot of different things happening pretty quick, so nice to have a lot over here. Bruce, on the ordinance, and I really didn't catch on to it until I saw the email we got on the snow route. Well, if we don't have a snow emergency called, we have cars parked on the snow routes, which is okay, so the trucks plow around them. And then if we declare a snow emergency, the email said that they could tow them or plow around them. I think they'll take the plow around them out of the snow emergency and leave it towed, because if you don't have any bite in your snow route, so.
I'm going to ask, Kenzie, you remember how many we plowed around? And I know the chief, you guys went out and got a lot of them moved too. I don't know whether we got them all cleared, did we? You did?
We did not write any tickets.
Did not write any? Okay. So you got them all cleared?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So, but I'll look at that ordinance, and if it does say that, then you're right. It needs to,
Yeah.
that portion needs to be cleared out of that if you're going to have any. Yeah, understand?
Do you have any idea how many cars had to be moved? Just roughly?
That we asked to move?
Yes.
No, I don't know.
Okay. That's actually, I don't know how you're ever gonna go around it. That's public safety, got enough to do that, go around asking people to move the cars, which are declared a snow emergency, they should know to move it anyway.
We are certainly kinder and gentler in that respect than any place I've ever been.
Yes. If we just had the letter and the radio station maybe announce that, I'll see if I can talk to them about that.
That's a traffic violation, Kevin.
That's all I have.
Councilman Miller.
I think the streets were cleared pretty well. I know you can't please everybody, but I think the folks that were working on that did a pretty good job of it, and they got right on it. I do think that we need to probably have some more discussion about what we want to put down as far as salt, and maybe we need to get that beet juice or whatever, but I think we maybe need to discuss that a little bit further, or get you guys to discuss it and come talk with us about it.
And you did buy some additional stuff?
We do have some calcium chloride on hand in bags, but not quite a full pallet, but which helps in some colder temp mixing in with the salt. It's not the same as beet juice might be, but it's better than just plain salt.
If I understood it correctly, and I'm not sure that I did, it said that the highway department was using pine chips.
I'm not sure, that, I know that within our MoDOT region, two of the maintenance sheds for MoDOT were completely out of salt when this snow came. Here locally, they still had 250 tons out of 1,800 that they started the season with. And they did, through the press releases, announced that they were going to be reducing the amount that they were applying to try to stretch it out. But as far as grit or anything goes,
This was mainly, I think, due to the ice
yeah.
and using it for traction.
Yeah, I didn't see anything about that, but it's possible.
I know it's hard to hit a golf ball out of pine chips, isn't it, right?
The crews, I'll give credit to our folks, with the ice storm on the weekend and then one day of respite on Monday and then 9 inches of snow on top of the ice did present some challenges for the crew. I think basically within our target of 24 hours, they did have the streets passable. So.
Pretty much what I've heard from the public.
That the snow is bad, but when you stop your truck in the middle of the road and your truck starts sliding sideways, so I take the snow any day of the week, yeah.
Bruce?
I have a couple questions. The comp plan was mentioned last week by someone. Where are we at with that?
We have the, I don't know what draft we call this, I don't know, Rita, but we have the latest draft back that staff is reviewing right now. And so that, meaning it's went through the steering committee, they've made their comments, they've rewritten it and sent it back to us, and we're now going back and looking to make sure those things have been entered. And if that is cleared, then I think it's pretty much ready to move forward and get out back to the steering committee and then released as a draft and then start the discussions.
Okay, so we're looking April, early April?
Yeah, I would say so, probably.
Okay. Park survey, where does that stand? We did a
I'll let
lot of
Chad talk about
surveying
that.
last year.
We just got the geotechnical data today. It was, apparently the holdup was their geographic information systems man had a heart attack. But they were very come with that information, so we finally got that data from them. I did my first perusal of it today. It looks good. We should be having a first draft that's an official draft here real shortly. So we'll start using that draft material in our presentations now that we know that it is dispersed across the city.
And we have given that draft to the comp plan people to incorporate into the comp plan.
And the park board's already seen that draft come.
Okay.
So it's good for us.
I'd also like for the council, and you guys can comment on this as well, Ralph made a suggestion at our last meeting that we look at some of the areas we're having some real issues with in terms of cleaning up old houses and property and length of time it takes, and maybe we need to have more teeth into some of our schedules, I guess, or whatever for these repeat offenders. And I really liked your idea of, having a community discussion about this with a committee of some sort. So we get more people involved in this, and, maybe just the mere discussion that we're having with it will influence some people to act. I don't know. But I would like to see that, and you guys chime in here. It's just not my idea, but that we follow up on what Ralph suggested and set some kind of timeline for working on this.
It's a problem every year.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, and I've been here almost 40 years, and it's been a problem as long as I know of. And I'm not sure that there's a complete answer to it at all, but, we've discussed in the past, increasing fines and so forth, that's up to the court. The ordinances are constructed in a way in which by statute there has to be so much time allowed. So I'm not sure that way we can do anything. I think perhaps if we use peer pressure, so to speak, it might have even better results than what we've done. Now, this isn't working. So
That's what I was thinking is peer pressure has, has the potential of working better than governmental pressure.
I'd be in favor of it, Mayor.
Yeah, I can get with you and we can talk about maybe how we want to do that. Rita, you're scheduled for your update when?
March 24th.
Okay, so the March meeting, she'll have an update in regards to everything her department's done, number of nuisances, things cleared and so on. So at least maybe that'll get you an idea of numbers too. So once she has that, I think that'll help your discussion. Would that be good? Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking in terms of something like we did with animal control, we had how we had a group of individuals come together, worked on it for about 6 months, got public input into it, had experts in the field. In this case, we need a couple lawyers involved, some people on the front lines, some community owners, some business people, to really figure out how we can solve this problem and make it better for our community. And maybe that we don't even do anything with our ordinance. I don't know. There may be another solution.
Well, I know our nuisance abatement officer is very frustrated as well at times.
I'm sure they are.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, public comment. We have comments from the public?
My name's Don Kofer. I live at 600 North Washington, and I just really want to commend the city, the council members, and the workers who came over and took care of our water problem over there. Really appreciate all your effort. Appreciate the effort of the guys that went out there and did it, because it was really not good weather when they did do it. Just want to tell you all thank you. I appreciate your effort. I hope we can go forward with the curb and gutter or the culvert, either one. It's just a Band-Aid that was put on there, but it's a nice Band-Aid. Everybody on the east side of the street, very happy. Mrs. Brown, the woman that came up here and spoke, she actually stopped me in the street as I was getting in my truck and said, "Who do we think? And when do we do it?" So I'm kind of up here for the people in the neighborhood. They don't even know I'm here, but I just wanted to say thank you for all your effort. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Anything else? Ralph?
I just want to make a couple comments. One is in relation to the brush dump. I would just comment that I think that the city has entirely too much volume coming into the brush dump. I think, Chad, you mentioned that they can, whoever's got big stuff can take it down to Foster's.
If they cut it 4 foot or less.
Yeah, in 4 foot lengths. Baki had to cut in 4 foot lengths too, because it was damaging so much of their equipment, their grinders. It still damages them. Most of the 4 foot lengths are logs, or trunks of trees. The people that cut trees in town, the tree trimmers, have the same option of taking it there or a lot of other places, as does the city. If you take a pickup load of brush and drop it and take one 2.5 foot, 4 foot log and grind it, see what the difference is in the volume that you have between the two. Great deal of difference. In relation to Mr. Loesch's, your comments, I would just make this comment. I think we have a lot of vehicles here in the community that we can already use and are semi-organized for this kind of thing. You have a committee. I'm not familiar with how it's developed or who's on it or anything else, but you have a committee that I think you mentioned, has looked at the comprehensive plan, whoever that might be. And I think you could simply ask that committee to look at these kind of issues too, as a public service or as a group of assets to do this. You also have the Planning and Zoning Commission. And, you know, there you have an attorney, you have a property appraiser, you have quite a few people that have a lot of insight into a lot of different areas, you know. And I think that you could use the Planning and Zoning Commission partly for some of that. A lot of planning and zoning commissions meet every single month. And those kinds of issues are, at least my personal experience has been in other communities. And all of those kind of issues are, at least to start out, you know, with some ideas and everything, brought to a group of individuals that's like the Planning and Zoning Commission. Because what you're talking about is planning. You're talking about goals, you're talking about approaches, and you're talking about methodologies to meet those goals and those approaches. And there's a lot of other people, too, in the community. So I think we have, if we gather the nucleuses of the people we have, I think we have a goodly amount of people that could work on situations like this. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing or hearing none, I move we adjourn.
Second.
Second, third.
Yes.
Nichols?
Yes.
Todd?
Yes.
Yes.